So in my garden I just have these peas that are just starting to come up. And if you're familiar with pea flowers, they're pretty distinctive. If you're really observant, you may have noticed that their flowers look just the same as these lupine flowers. That's because they're in the same family, the pea family. Let's explore some of those members around Washington State. We grow a lot of plants from this family around Washington State, whether that's alfalfa, lentils, peas, beans. I actually grow a lot of those in this state, but there are plenty of natives as well. You may know them by another name, which is legumes, and if I can back up a slide, I'll show you why. We now call this family FABACEAE, but the old name is Leguminosae, because they're legumes. Those unique pea flowers produce the seed pods, which are actually specifically called legumes. So if you know what a bean looks like, that's a legume, a specific type of fruit, just like a berry is. Well, there's plenty of native examples as well, like lupines and milk-vetch, that often grow in very poor soils, because one thing this whole family has in common is that they fix nitrogen really well. Their roots associated with bacteria, and those pull in nitrogen, which adds nitrogen to the soil, which is a great thing for the plants that come after them. Now, in the plant family tree, they sit right up here in the eudicots, along with roses and oaks and others like that. In terms of the family traits, the most distinctive thing that I've been talking about is the flowers. So these pea flowers, they're bilaterally symmetrical, so you can divide them right down the middle. And then they have 5 petals, which are kind of interesting. They have this big showy banner petal up at the top. And then below that, you can see it better up on this one, is a keel. It looks like the front of a boat, and that's 2 petals joined. And then kind of beside those, on either side of these 2 clasping ones, sometimes they stick out to the side. They look like 2 praying hands sometimes. And those are the wings. So that's those guys. Of course, the fruits are a legume, some sort of bean pod. The leaves are usually compound, and most of these in the state are herbaceous plants. Lots of trees and shrubs further south are, but up here in the temperate climate, mostly herbaceous plants. If you know you have something in the pea family, then how would you identify it? Well, first you got to know about the leaves. Are they palmately compound like this one, or pinnately compound, looking more like a feather, like the milk-vetch down here? From there, other details like number of leaflets and how hairy the leaves are, and of course details about the flower and the fruit are useful as well. Let's start with a familiar one. Alfalfa grows all over the place, and you might look at this fruit over here. There's a bunch of them. These right here is one that kind of sticks out. You think that doesn't look like a bean. It is, it's just coiled up. So it's a bean pod that's been coiled. And those flowers are a typical pea flower. So if you got some of these growing around as a weed or in a field nearby, you have plenty of examples of the pea family. Lupines are a nice showy native plant. There are dozens of species and all pretty easy to identify because of 2 main characteristics. The first is their leaves. So even without flowers, you can usually tell it's a lupine because of these star or sort of asterisk shaped pattern to their leaves. These are palmately compound leaves. And you can see it on each of the examples. This one's a little tougher because of the shadows, but all of them have that same feature. And then the other one is this tower of flowers that rises up above the leaves in this raceme, and usually a purple color, sometimes ranging a little more toward the blue, sometimes more toward lavender, sometimes with some white mixed in, but most lupines are in that sort of color range, all with those fairly large flowers, and a whole bunch of them together. And these will range anywhere from the shrub steppe up into alpine environments. So you can enjoy them just about anywhere, and they seem to do well, especially in these kind of poor soils. One of the imports we have of clovers is the red clover. You probably find this in your lawn. These flowers are arranged in a head, and you wouldn't really think that they look like pea flowers, but if you get out a magnifying glass and look close enough, you'll see that they have that same arrangement. They have compound leaves as well, always in these three parts, thus the genus name trifolium for three leaves. So there's the red clover, and you'll find red clover, white clover. If you know others growing as weeds in lawns, they're not a native species, but one that's kind of fascinating is the big head clover, Trifolium macrocephalum, which just means big head. And these are huge. I mean, that is an impressive inflorescence here. Look at that thing. You can see the pea flower shape with that really big banner petal up here and the wings and keel down below. And they produce pretty small seed pods with usually just one seed. And instead of being three leaves like most clovers are, these are dissected up even a little bit more and look a little more lupine-like if it weren't for this jagged margin. Most of them have kind of toothy margins. And you'll find this especially in kind of more clayey soils in the shrub steppe and up into the foothills under the ponderosa pines. Milk-vetch, you can overlook it pretty easily. They usually grow pretty low to the ground and have pretty tiny flowers. They're bean pods or legumes. Sometimes they're almost camouflaged. Usually they're not inflated, but this one happens to be. And when you break that open like I have here, you see all the little seeds lined up inside, just like you'd expect in a bean or a pea. Flowers usually range from this lavender to white. They grow in really poor soils. They certainly don't seem bothered by the heat. They're not bothered by the cold. They're a very hardy plant. Again, that nitrogen fixing helps them. They usually have very fuzzy leaves that are pinnately compound, so they're fairly easy to recognize that way. In some places, they're called loco weed. They accumulate certain minerals that tends to drive livestock crazy, so not one to let your horse munch on very much. Another common weed is the purple peavine. Here you see very, very large, showy pea flowers and a cluster on the end. Pinnately compound leaves, and these end in little tendrils that wrap around other vegetation to help them climb. So these guys are fine. Find them in pretty disturbed habitats here and there, often along trails or roadsides. Pretty common to encounter them there. And there are smaller varieties as well, but this one's just big and showy, so it's easy to spot. Well, that's it for the pea family, and a lot of interesting plants here, important for many reasons. I hope that you will find some on your next outing. Until next time, happy botanizing.